Alright, developers, so today I want to show you how you can create a mobile application, and the mobile application is going to use Ionic2, which uses Angular2, TypeScript, and we're going to use a particular design pattern, and the design pattern I want to show you is a list with a detail and a form. So list, detail, form. And how that translates in Ionic is you have a application module, which is your controller. Then you have a list or a master page, and then it lists a set of items, and when you click an item it navigates to the detail page, and the detail page embeds or has included sort of the form page that, or the form component that represents the objects that you want to view or create or edit. So here we go.
So the first thing I want to show is that this video has a written form. I posted it on medium.com, so that's a publication platform, medium.com. And then if you go to my profile, which is /@remcodev, REMKOHDEV, so it's medium.com/@REMKOHDEV. Then you'll find a list of publications, and there is a publication from September 12, create an Angular2-Ionic2 mobile app with a list, nested, detail, and form pattern. So let's click that, and then here we'll see the details. And as you see, a little bit of a description of the design pattern that I'm trying to teach you. And then here's sort of a representation of that design pattern. So you have an app module.ts, you have a object list, an object detail, and the object detail then includes this this form, this Angular form, or the Ionic form that we'll be using. So the way they refer to this is also, it's a master with nested details, and the form is a detail page that's nested within the detail page, right? So I hope you get that. So to get started, let's open a terminal, and the first thing that I want to do is create the base Ionic application, and I'm going to use the tabs template that comes straight out of the box with Ionic, right? So let's open the terminal here on the left, and the first thing I want to do is I browsed through my root directory, and then I have a development environment source, and I do a lot of my development in this GitHub directory. So that's where I am now. Now the first thing I want to do is, so here on the right I have my instructions. So if you scroll down a little bit from there, you'll see that the base command to start an Ionic application is Ionic start, and then the title of the application is my app. And then I'm using a template called tabs. So that's what you see here. So we'll run that first. That will, I'm not going to update right now, but that will create the directory, and it'll create the base Ionic application. I'm going to go to my Atom IDE, which is straight text editor here. And I'm going to add a project folder of the project that is being created. So that way I just can easily navigate back and forth. So I go to GitHub, here's my app that's in the process of being created. And now you see here the files that are being executed and being run still. So let's wait for that. So the first thing I will do then is I'm gonna just run the base application as is with the Ionic serve command, which runs the application within the browser. In this case, I have my Chrome browser, and that's where I show you what the application out of the box with a tabs template looks like. Okay, so the application has finished, and as the instructions here already show, you can change into the directory folder, and to run your app in the browser, it says here Ionic serve. So let's do that first. So cd change directory into my app, which is the name of the project that I've chosen, and then here I can run the app in the browser. This will run, and this will open to my right in the browser here. It'll open the application. So the server is running. It's starting up in my application, in my browser. I mean, there it is. It pops up. And if you want to see the application more in sort of a mobile view, then the nice thing about Chrome here to the top right, you can customize your control, and then you can go to More Tools, Developer Tools. So if you click those, you can toggle here on this side between the devices you have. So now it's a web app, now it's a mobile app, and you can set the types of some default emulators here, design. So say if you want to see the Galaxy, this is what it would kind of look like on a Galaxy S5, or if you want to see it on an iPhone 6, it'll look slightly different. Now, if you go to the contacts page here to the top right, so these are the tabs that we currently have. There's a Home tab, an About tab, and a Contact tab. Let's click the Contact tab, and you see this is what it currently looks like. It's an Ionic framework, that's all the text we see, and it's sort of a little encouragement to follow Ionic framework. Now, if you go to the project to the left page here, then you'll see pages, and you'll see the tabs structure here. So if you open those, you'll see the different tabs, the Home, the About, and the Contacts, which are the tabs that you see here to the right. That's sort of set to the home page, which is one directory up, then home, / that's where the home is. That's in this home directory under source pages. And then the same thing is true for the second tab. It's set to the About, the third to the Contact. And those are found, as is defined here, in their respective directories. Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to change this contact page there. So in page, in contact, this contact HTML, which now has this little follow on Twitter and then the @Ionic framework sign. We're going to change this by a list. So this is going to be the contact list. And then when you click on an item in that list, you'll go to a detail page. So let's work on that next. So if you scroll down, and we basically have stepped you through these steps, and you come with step 2. Because we want to create some realistic data, so I'm going to read that data from a data file, and the data file is going to be in JSON format. So it says here, create a new file. The data directory is created here in data assets. So let's do this here in the source /assets. Let's create a new directory, new folder. Data, and within that let's create a new file, and this is our contacts in JSON, and then it's as simple as copying the full JSON here into this file, save it. One comment to make sure these are double quotes, that's just otherwise you'll get a problem with reading it in. But the next step is I want to create a data service that reads that file. The reason why I create a separate class or a separate provider to read the data is because then the rest of the application becomes agnostic about how I get the data. All the rest of the data, all the pages do is like data service, give me the contacts, data service, give me this, give me that. Or same thing for if you want to store or save. Everything is handled by the data service. That nicely isolates that functionality. It'll help us testing it. It helps us making changes if we want to change the endpoint, for instance, or where the data comes from. So you can do this by using the generate command. This will create a separate provider component in Ionic and Angular, and we'll see what happens here. So if we go back to the command line to the terminal, let's interrupt the Ionic serve command, and then if we do here Ionic generate a provider, and the provider is called data service. Let's execute this. And what it's going to do is if you look at the Atom project folder here to the left, and you go to /source/providers, so open up the providers folder, you see already it created this data/service folder, and within it is creating this data service class, so which is a provider class. Let's open this, and this is sort of the default generated service, and it's not doing anything. It's here it has a constructor, and it's just saying it's logging hello. But we're going to change it to the code to the right here. So let's scroll down and edit this file by copying this code, and we're going to replace the whole code. So delete whatever there, paste it. So what you see here is it defines the data service provider class. I'm creating a variable that points to the .assets. So this is the root directory of the application, which is in source, and then it reads in assets data this file. So this is just a file path, and I'm using the HTTP module, which I've added here. This HTTP package, it comes from the Angular package, and I'm using it here to do a get from a file path in this case. So automatically it's going to read from file. And then upon successful read, I'm going to promise to return the response, which I convert to JSON. So now I have a nice method here called getContacts that's implementing a promise, it's returning a promise, it returns some object, and this is the actual object being returned, which, going back to the context.json file, will look like this. So now I have a method on my data service provider that I can call data service provider.getContacts, and I have my contacts on file. Later, if you want to replace that with a REST call to your server, which we will be doing in another episode using loopback, then all you need to do is add another method or replace this method in the data service provider, and you're done. You don't have to touch the rest of the application. So another thing to note is if you go to the app.module.ts, what the generator did, it already added the data service provider here. So it imports the data service provider, and here in the providers, it added this data service provider here. So now my application is, with the same command, already configured to use this data service provider. Perfect. So that finishes at number 3, where we wanted to create a data service to read the contact data from a file. Already done. The next thing we want to do, so we're going to jump ahead and we're going to create a contact form. Then later we're going to create a class that represents that contact object. And the contact object is then displayed in the form. And then we're going to add the contact detail page, which includes the form, which you can see here. So we're going to follow those steps, and then let's go back to creating the contact form component first. So here we go. The contact detail form is an Angular component, and it has an HTML representation. It has a TypeScript class, and I'm going to use the generator again. So here we say Ionic generates, in this case not a provider, but we're going to create a component, Angular component. And the name of the component is contact detail form. That's going to create in the source directory a components directory. So let's see that in action. So we're going to generate it, then going to wait, and here it is. Here's a components directory. And in the components directory, there's a little components module that's sort of a configuration of your components. And as you see here, contact detail form is already configured in the application. And it added a folder with all the Angular components. So the HTML form currently is nothing. And the TypeScript class, which currently also doesn't do much except displaying that text script. But we're going to replace that. So let's first edit the .html. So let's copy this form. So I'm going to close the previous files first, save it, of course. And then here in the context, let's delete everything that there was there and replace it. Now, what did we do? We created a form. In it, we have an Ionic list, so it's just a CSS tag, a custom tag that has some embedded CSS. And we have an Ion item, an item in the list, right? So each control represents an item. Now this first name, last name, username, let's go back to the assets data. It's represented here, first name, last name, username, city, state, country. We all want to represent those. So that's what happens here. And we are using this ng model context first name. So that's like a two-way data binding in Angular, so that when I make a change to the data object, that will be represented in the HTML, in the DOM. And if I make a change in the DOM by editing this first name, then there's an automatic persistence to the data object in Angular. So that's what this method here does. And doing the same thing for each of those properties, so first name, last name, username, and then in the button, I'm going to have an onClicked method. And I'll explain here. So what you see is it's passing in this edit property. What I'm doing in also these previous controls here, you have here a disabled not edit. So what this means is like, if you want to, I'm going to track in what mode we are. Are we in read or are we in edit mode? Now, if I'm in edit mode, the edit property is set, it's a Boolean, is set to true. And then this is not true. So if we're in edit mode, when edit is true, the disabled is false. Yeah. So the disablement of this input tag is set to false if the edit property is true. That means it's enabled. You know, when we're in read mode, the edit property, the edit boolean, is false. We're not in edit mode. Then it reads false, negative false is true, and then disable this control. So that's what we're doing here. And then in the button, every time I click it, I'm passing this, and every time I click it, I switch back from read to edit mode, from true to false, true to false. And I'm displaying the text on the button based, if the edit mode is true, then I'm changing the text to save, because after you edit, you want to save it. If we're in read mode, then I want to have a button that says edit, because I want to be able to edit my read component, right? So that's this form. We do need to create an onClicked method. So that's done in the TypeScript component. So let's copy paste the code for that and open this contact detail form TypeScript. Let's remove this and replace this by our code. And what I'm doing here is I've created this Boolean property edit that allows me to switch between read and edit mode in the form. In the constructor, I default to false. When it gets first loaded, I want to be in read mode. And then the method, every time I click on a button, it toggles the edit the property. There's an onSubmit. This handles the form if it's submitted. And I want to, I might want to do things if I submit or save the button that goes beyond just saving the state of the object, which is already handled by Angular. So that's that. We still need to add a class that represents the object, the contact object. Super simple thing. What we can do here, it's considered a component. I consider it a component, so I'm going to do in the component, create a new file. And I'm going to call it contact model, because it's sort of a representation of the data model as a TypeScript class. And all I do is I'm going to create this JavaScript or TypeScript class called contact model. And the nice thing about TypeScript here is by creating a constructor with the properties that are represented in here, so make sure the properties of the data corresponds to the properties in the constructor, then TypeScript automatically will create, implicitly it will create properties on that class that represents those properties in the constructor. So no need to do that. So let's see. So the next thing we need to do is one thing that's missing at the moment. So we're reading the data from file. We're representing it in a data object and then passing it to the form, but the input, the form doesn't know it's getting data from that particular object, because if you go to this, like there's nowhere here that indicates I'm getting my contact object. So what we do by that is we're going to add this input decorator, it's called. It's going to tell Angular that we're going to get an input object called contact, represented by the contact model, by default set to null, but we're going to get that passed in from the detail page, which we currently have not created yet. But the detail page, which embeds the form, is going to embed the form, is going to have that contact object. And this input decorator is now telling this form that it's expecting an object of this type. This contact object then is referred here as contact dot, right? So each property on that contact model is referred to in the HTML form here this way. So let's copy paste this. In the contact detail form, it's going to delete and replace, but it's just going to have this input decorator here. So that's an important one. So that's what we add here. If you want to read more, there's in the documentation a link to why add input. And it's just, it adds that little binding element. So this is the representation in the detail page that we're going to add. So that's what we're going to do next. So we're already at number 6. We can use a generator again. In this case, we're going to create a page element, right? So let's close all this. And then here in the terminal, let's generate this page. And it's the contact detail page. So Ionic generate, in this case, component type is page, and the name is contact detail. So I'm running this, and then if I close these other opponents and go back to pages, now you see here that there's a contact detail component being generated under pages, and we're going to see at the default HTML, it doesn't have anything, it's empty. But we're going to replace that with our HTML. And what's nice about this one is here this is like a custom HTML tag. But that custom HTML tag is pulling in the contact detail form. And the contact object that's passed to that contact detail form that we set with the input decorator, it's pointing to the selected contact. And we'll see that in this detail page in the TypeScript class, we're going to set that selected contact property or the object. So let's scroll down, and this is our contact detail TypeScript class, the component. So let's copy paste this. In this contact detail.ts, let's remove what was here before and paste this new one. And what we do here is a few things. We're importing the contact detail because here we set the selected contact of type contact model, which represents the contact object. And we're going to get this passed in by the contact list. The contact list will navigate and pass in a navigation parameter, and that is called contact. And that's going to be a contact object, contact model, and we're setting the value here. So that's all it does. But remember, once this gets set, because the list item is passed into this detail page, here in the contact detail page, we set the contact object for that form to that selected contact, right? And if you then go back to the components and look at the detail form, we set the add input contact, which is now expecting to be bound by a contact object, which is then represented in the form. So that's hope that doesn't go too fast. Otherwise, you can review that a few times. So here we are back in the and that's all really. That's all. It's amazing how fast this goes. Now the last thing we need to do, so we have the detail page done, we have the form done, we already reading the data from file. The last thing we really need to do is create the contact list page, which is currently just set the Twitter handle, but we want to replace that with a proper Ionic and Angular list. Now, we already have the contact page, so I'm not going to create a new page. I'm just going to reuse this contact page here, which currently has a Twitter handle, as you see. I'm going to replace everything, though, with this code here. I'm going to copy, delete everything that's currently there, and paste it in there. Now, this Ion list has items that are for each contact in the contact list. That's set here. So there's an Angular for loop. I'm going to pass in an array of an array of contacts, and then for each of the contacts in that array, I'm going to create an Ion item, which has an onSelect method, and the class selected is the contact is referring to the selected item. So in the list, the Ionic item, it has a class property, and there's a selected. If you select an item, the current contact is set to that selected contact. So that's how I work that. And here it's referring each time that particular contact is representing by a first name, last name, city, and state. In the contact TS, I need to set the contact though. So this is where I'm going to set the context array read from file by the data service. So let's copy paste the code first. Delete everything that's currently in this contact.ts. And then if I step you through it here, I'm going to add the data service provider. And I'm going to add the contact detail page because I'm going to navigate to that contact detail page. But otherwise, set an array of contacts. The constructor must have the data service instance. And then all I'm doing is I'm setting the current contacts array to the contacts I'm getting from the data service. Right? That's what I'm doing here. There's a promise that I need to implement. So the contacts I'm getting back is going to be set to this contact here. This context in this class. And then onSelect. So each time you do an onSelect, go back to the HTML. Every time there's a click on that particular item, there's an onSelect method being triggered. I implement that method here. And I'm going to navigate to the contact detail page and pass in this item that was selected as the contact. Then in the contact detail TS, I'm going to read that contact out here and set it to the selected contact. So, simple enough. And that's really all that needs to be done in this page as well. So I can close these. We're almost done. There's just a few missing components to configure the application. So we need to go to, oops, thank you for the updates, not right now. Here, if you go to the app module.ts, we need to do a few things. So let me explain what we need to do. We need to add the HTTP module just so it gets configured on startup. We need to add the pages and the form components. And there's this particular custom element schema that you must configure here as a schema in the NG model, the Angular model, because we're using this custom HTML tag, and that's what this custom element schema is referring to. And that helps, otherwise it would break. So I'm going to copy paste this whole app.module.ds. I'm going to select everything here, delete everything, and replace it by what we have. And then I'll show you to step through this here. So from the core, Angular core, we're importing this custom element schema. These are all by default here. Here's the data service provider that was already done before. But we need to add the HTTP module, add the contact detail page, and the contact detail form component, which is the form. Same thing, add those, the page and the form here in the declarations, add the HTTP module in the imports, add the contact detail page in the entry components. Data service provider was added already, but here at the end, add a schemas property that add that custom schema element schema. So let's close that, and theoretically we should be done if we didn't make a mistake. So let's do Ionic serve to see if that works. It's gonna spin up a new component, a new tab, I should say. Let's close the old one. Okay, so it seems to be starting up. Let's do a shift refresh just to make sure that I'm not having anything in cache. And then we can do the same thing here by the settings, more tools, developer tools. You can set this tab also to the mobile element. We can go to component, to context, and lo and behold, we have our list here. If I click on item 1, I can click edit, 1 done, save, and you see that there's this nice CSS change for edited properties. And if I go back, you see here it's the object is persisted, so you see here 1 done, back to home, user 2, and voila, there you go.
So that was that. I hope you enjoyed the show. Stay put for more, and more is to come, so take care and ciao. See you next time.